Hey, hi Aditya.
Hello.
Yeah, so Aditya, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Aditya Venkat, and I've been working in the field for 4 years now, and I mostly deal with Terraform, Kubernetes, and Jenkins. We work on pipeline scripts, and basically we troubleshoot any issues that crop up during the build stages or during the deployment stages. We basically concentrate more on those.
Okay. Okay, like, can you please explain, like, can you please highlight your pipeline, like how it looks like or how the stages and all are is there?
So for the basic pipelines that we use are we use the complete CI/CD process in the pipeline. So we start off with your the pipeline command, and then we follow it up with agent. Most of the time we execute the commands in our slaves. So we have different slaves with different labels. So we just specify the label and then we execute the stages. So the very first stage is your Git checkout, where we pull out the required data or the codes from the repository. Simple command with the Git and the repository link. And then we have the build stage where we use mostly Java related codes. So we run the Maven build tool, and sh maven clean install basically converts the code into whatever executable format that we want. We work on your var and jar files. And then we have the artifactory stage, push to artifactory stage, where we use the Maven command once again to deploy to our artifactory, which is a JFrog. And once we have pushed it to the artifactory, we also run tests in between. We use WebSphere for testing our Java code. And after that, it is deployed. It is basically deployed into the we use Tomcat also to check the deployment, and we also use JCube to check deployments, mostly JCube. And we use the sh copy command and copy it into the required folders for execution.
Okay. So let's say one server is there. Okay. And
Okay.
from outside, the user is trying to log into the server. Okay. But he's not able to log in to the server. So what might be the issues or how can you resolve that?
So the very first issue might be permissions. So we would need to check the permissions of the user, whether he is permitted to log into that particular server or not. If not, you have to add him to the exception list. Or if required, we might have to give him sudo access, or we can also give him temporary access by setting up a temporary permissions.
Let's say he's authorized user, okay? He's having all permissions and all. He's able to log into other servers, but he's not able to log into that particular server. So like how
that particular server. So you would need to check if he's so whenever you have to log into the server, the very first thing is you need to enter your username and your passwords. So we need to first check if the username and passwords that the particular the user has entered is correct or not. And after that, we can also go and check the settings of that particular server as well. We need to see if the IP addresses are up to date, or if there are any issues with the IP address, or is the static IP that we use static. We generally keep the public IP static. So in for servers which need access to the internet, so we need to check if that is working fine or not. And also we need to check if the DNS settings are correctly set up or not. So in case there are any errors around this particular aspect, yes, we would need to make the required rectifications. And also we have to check with the user as well if they have entered the correct username and the password.
Okay. So let's say you're using Terraform in your organization, right?
Yes.
So how are you using it? Like for what you are using, and how are you using Terraform?
So we are using Terraforms to create different types of resources. We use from simple Terraform resource creations like your instances. We also use it to create different VPNs, and we also look at setting up and updating the different files that we would be using, including updating the required or installing the required files whenever we are creating any new instances or whenever we have to update any particular resources. And we also use it to create different S3 buckets.
Sorry to interrupt
so
you.
we take the Terraform. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm asking, like, how are you using Terraform to spin those instances or whatever resource you're creating? Like, are you using directly from your system, or maybe you have integrated it somewhere else? Or like, how are you using Terraform?
We basically use remote servers for accessing the Terraform. So our state files are in basically your remote state files, because considering security issues, all the required codes are generally kept in your remote state files. And so we basically use our remote exec provisioners in order to pull out the required data. And we also create whatever Terraform files that we want to run or basically apply. We use it through the remote states, just to make sure, the security wise everything is set up. So we don't execute any, or we don't store any particular Terraform state files within our local systems. It's all done in the remote states.
Okay, so do you use Docker in your organization?
Yes, Docker is a containerization tool that we use in Kubernetes.
Okay, so can you like tell me what is use of multi-stage build, and can you give me one example, like what you have like use multi-stage build to create in your organization?
So for your Docker multi-stage build, so basically what it does is one stage flows into the other, and so it makes basically execution of different Docker files very, very easy. And the biggest advantage of a multi-stage build is you would be using the codes. The codes would be reusable. So we can basically, let's say I want to run a simple setup where we are using, or let's say creating a particular jar file, and then we are setting it up to deploy to another file. So we would, in Jenkins, we basically use the shared libraries. So for Docker also we use something similar. And here what we would do is run the required files. So when we would create the jar file, and the same jar file will be used in the next stage, where we are basically pushing it to the artifactories, and then that same file again would be whatever is the artifactory that we are using, it will be automatically pushed into the deployment stage to your web sphere. So that is a basic example of your Docker multi-stage.
Okay, like can you explain few instructions what you have used in your multi-stage build?
So for Docker multi-stage build, so we would first create the required a Docker file. So we would use the very first command would be the from, where we are basically pulling out the required image. And then so we use different images. We can use Golang, we can use Alpine. So based on the requirements, we use different images, and then we start off by setting up the run command, where we are using your different stages. So for example, the very first thing would be is to we would run the checkout command. We would run the checkout command and basically run git checkout to whatever is the repository URL. And then now once that is done,
You will run
we would
checkout
again
command in
use.
So what will be the command to do checkout?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Like what will be the command to get code from Git in Docker multi-stage build?
It's I can't hear. It's getting cut in between.
Okay, so like I'm asking like what will be the command to get code into that image? Like you told right
Sorry,
you will
what is
check
the
out.
command to?
You told right you will do git checkout, right? Checkout command you will run it. Checkout command.
Yes. So if we are using so we would basically if you want to run a particular command, I mean we would be logged into GitHub already in our particular server. So wherever we are creating the containers, also we would have been we would have logged into the GitHub. So generally when we create the images, I mean, of course, most of the time we don't use a Git checkout because we would already have the required files in the local repo. So we can go directly into the Maven clean install wherever and give the path of the pom.xml file, and then once the jar or var file is built, we would again use the run command, and we would basically set up the required execution, basically pushing it to the artifactory, and then you would be run Maven deploy. We would be pushing it into the artifactory, and then we would to deploy it, we would just copy it into the required web apps folder.
Okay. Okay, so like can you tell like how are you managing state file in your organization for Terraform?
How are
How are you managing state file of Terraform?
so the state file? So normally, if we are generally we would be using the remote state in the state file. So we have a S3 bucket available where we store all the required codes in the state file. So initially we did start off with local state. Basically, the state files are maintained locally, but then we switched it to remote state quite some time back.
Okay, so let's say you have one server, okay, and like you saw like CPU utilization is above 90% and it is happening again and again. So how will you troubleshoot that one?
So generally we would check if what is causing the particular issue. So the very first thing would be we would run the command df-h. So df-h gives all the required details, including your CPU usage as well as memory utilizations. And then we also will run the top command to see
Are
what
you
and all of the
sure
processes that
for
are there. And
df-h?
yes, so df-h, I mean, yes, it does give you the CPU utilization, which is already there. And we would basically run the
Okay.
top command as well to check out all the processes which are utilizing a higher amount of memory. So once that is done, we would see, okay, if any particular processes which are not required, which can be killed, we would do that. Otherwise, we will. So we have autoscalers in place. So anytime, generally, if the CPU utilization does hit a higher benchmark, we would the autoscaler would take over and automatically run a new pod, and the CPU utilization would be distributed. We generally prefer horizontal autoscaling, but yes, depending on the requirement or depending on which process or which pod is having the issues, we would vertically autoscale as well.
Okay, so like can you explain how are you using load balancers in your project with proper use case, like where you are using which load balancer?
Sorry,
Like which load balancer you are using in
could
your
you repeat
project?
that, please?
Which load balancer you are
Which
using?
load?
Load balancer, yeah, load balancer you are using in your project.
So we basically work on AWS. We do create a lot of AWS.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, yes. I think you
Yeah,
got disconnected in between.
yeah, yes. There is some network issue. So yeah, you can continue. Like, what load balancers
Yeah.
you
So,
use in your organization?
yeah. Yeah. So for the load balancers, since we run a lot of web applications and work on AWS as well, we use the application load balancer. And considering it's most our protocols are mostly around HTTP and HTTPS, and so whenever required, so in case there are increases in the traffic, the particular the application load balancer comes into play, and it just spins up a new pod, and then the traffic is routed through the new pod.
New pod. So you went to Kubernetes. Like, I want to know the difference between like application load balancer and network load balancer. Okay, in AWS.
Okay, so your application load balancer mainly deals with HTTP and HTTPS protocols, and your network load balancer completely operates on the network traffic. It is completely based on the network traffic, and your application load balancer operates at the request level, whereas your network load balancer operates at the IP or the connection level. And your network load balancer is used to basically distribute incoming traffic from multiple IP addresses, whereas your application load balancer is generally used when we have a lot of HTTP requests, not necessarily from different IP addresses per se, but in case we have multiple requests from same or similar IP addresses, I would not say same, similar IP addresses, yes, then our application load balancer takes place. And your network load balancer can handle a lot more requests per second, whereas your application load balancer is handles relatively fewer requests.
Okay. So can you please explain like what is private link in AWS?
What is
Private link. What is use of private link in AWS?
Okay, so when you are, let's say there are many files that you have in your organization, and most of the files would basically be when it comes to security, or when it comes to setting up secure lines within your particular VPC. We would be basically using your private links. So now suppose I want to connect to a particular resource, which is of course connect maybe in a different VPC. We can basically use this particular private link to connect to that required service that we have.
So, can you highlight a little more like what are the steps or how to achieve that?
So how to achieve a particular private link?
Yes.
Okay, so basically we would need to create a VPC endpoints first. Okay, so you have an option to create endpoints in AWS itself. So you would create your particular VPC endpoints, and then you would enter the required private link where when you are setting up your policies, you would mention the private link there, and then you would be able to access the required resources.
Okay. So okay. So can you like tell me like combination? How can you fit these three commands in your use? Like three op command, set command, and grep. You have to fit it while fetching a log for a service. So you have to use in a way like all three commands should be used to fetch some logs or something. Basically, I want to know the use of these three commands. altogether.
So you would
How
use
will
the
you use
the command you want to use are the
awk, set
awk
and
command,
grep. Awk, set and grep.
set SED
Yes, and grep.
and
Grep.
Okay, so when we generally your logs are stored in the /var/logs, or if it is of a particular application /application name /logs. So there would be your where the logs are stored. So we would use the awk command first. Awk command is generally used to pull out specific columns of data. So you would, let's say I want the first column to be printed out, and I want the last column, or we want to print the last column also. So we use the awk command, and then we use the $1 and the whatever is the last column that we have, and then we would basically pipe it into grep. Now let's say grep, I want a particular data of my log files. Let's say I want to look at the logs of a particular application, or I want to look at the logs from a certain set of time. So then basically I would use pipe it into the grep command, and then the grep command, what I would do is require grep with the required string that I'm searching for. And so your sed command is generally used to basically copy file. I mean, sed has got multiple uses, and sed command is sometimes used to replace certain words, or so maybe replace one string with another. So what I can do is I can replace that as well, or I can, let's say I want a particular string to be printed out from the filtration of the grep command as well. So now suppose I'm let's say filtering it by particular application name. So you would have multiple processes with that application name. So then I want to print a particular line from whatever is the output of the grep. So I want to, let's say, print the 5th line or the 6th line. Then I would use sed -n and 5p, and with the so when I pipe it into that sed -n 5p, then automatically the 5th line is printed. Or if I want to print everything, I would use sed -n and use the dollar symbol,
Okay,
and $p, and it'll print it.
okay. So how will you troubleshoot a Docker container?
So when we are creating Docker containers, so we generally use the Docker files. So anytime a particular issue crops up with your Docker container, you would see the output, and you would see where are the errors located. So I generally would go back to my Docker file and check if the image names are set up. And then I would check if the run commands that I'm using are set up correctly, or I need to also make sure, in case I'm using any CMDs or entry points, I need to make sure that those are also set up correctly, where in case I'm entering any values, the values that I'm entering for the entry point is also correct or not. So these are the basic steps. And another thing I can do is I would be checking the logs and see if there are any issues with that particular application or whatever is the Docker file that is being running. And in case there are some conflicting files that are present, I would use the docker prune command and remove out any any containers which are not being used. So that would be the basic troubleshooting steps that I use.
Okay. So you're using Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
So how much you will rate yourself in Kubernetes?
So out of a 5, I would rate myself a 4.
Okay, 4. So let's say one master and 2 node cluster is there. Okay, one master and 2
Yes.
node. So and I want to add one more node, worker node in that one. So how we can do that?
So you have one master and 2 nodes, right? And you would basically want to add one more node.
Yes.
Okay, so so you would have to first log into the particular master resource, and you would need to first create your particular node in AWS, and then once you have created that node, you would need to so generally we use so for your worker nodes, generally we would use simple T2 files if you are, I mean, if you are looking at it in the basic sense. So we would first create that, and then we would basically go into that node, and we would be using I kind of lost my thought process.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so how we can configure VPA in Kubernetes?
How can we
configure VPA?
So VPA is nothing but the vertical pod autoscaler, right?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, if you want to configure the VPA, what we would basically need to do is we would need to first set up the we would need to basically write a particular YAML file. So the API version would be V1 itself. So because we are using an autoscaler, we would be using the autoscaling.k8s/V1. And then you would enter your autoscaling vertical pod autoscaler, and you would basically set up a target reference, and which would basically be the generally the pods that you would be looking at, and you would be using a we use a deployment controller then. So then we set up the update mode to auto, so that whenever required, it automatically sets up the particular auto scaling automatically. So of course, before that, we would need to first install the VPA itself. So once that is done, you would basically write this simple YAML file. You can get that online. I unfortunately don't know the exact, exact code, because generally whatever are the codes required, we take it from the internet, and then we would use it.
So let's say I want to delete logs which are more than 10 days old. Okay, in Linux. Okay, I want to delete the logs which are more than 10 days old. Okay.
You lost connection between. I can't.
Like I want to delete logs. Okay, for any application.
You want to create logs.
Delete logs. I want to delete logs.
I'm sorry, but there is some connection issue. I'm unable to hear things.
Like I want to delete logs. Delete logs.
You want to delete logs?
Yes. Which are 10 days old. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I want to delete the logs which are older than 10 days in Linux.
In Linux, which are older than 10 days.
10 days.
Okay. So if you are looking at, so the logs will be generally placed in the /var/logs file. And so from there, we will be able to get the required logs. And of course, if you're looking at particular applications, then you would need to check that as well. So, but then now, if you want to specifically just look at logs which are older than, let's say, 10 days, you would use the find command. So you would put the find with the mtime as find-mtime plus 10. And then you would give the particular path with the -f command, because you just want to look at the files. So you would basically use find -type f with the path, and then you would put -m time as +10. So the path would be your log files path /var/logs, and you would add /star as well to check all the files. And then you can, so basically it does it recursively. If you want to particularly add, so if you want to limit it to a particular layer or a particular level, you would just add a hyphen, you would add max depth, you would add hyphen max depth, and then you would be able to do it. So that would be it. And then if you want to delete it, you just use the rm command, pipe it into an rm command.
Okay.
So automatically it gets removed.
Okay. Okay. So it was nice talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.